Hi everyone, it's Mrs. Seitz, and today you guys are going to be learning about square and cubic roots. So, a square root is a number when multiplied by itself equals the given number. So, every positive number has a positive and negative square root, and they consist of what's called perfect squares. A perfect square is a number with an integer as its square roots. So if you guys take a look at this little chart that I have over here, and you should have this in your notes, and if you don't, I want you to pause the video and I want you to include it in here. Okay, a perfect square would be an example like 1, because 1 times 1 equals 1, or 4, because 2 times 2 equals 4, or 9, because 3 times 3 equals 9, and so on. It goes all the way up, okay? Perfect squares and square roots are opposites of one another. So, for example, if I asked you guys to find the square root of 4, you would think of 2 because you want to find what two numbers that are exactly the same when you multiply them together to give you the number that's inside the square root sign. Another example I could give you would be what's the square root of 64? Okay, so again, we're thinking what two numbers that are exactly the same that would give you 64. So that number would be 8, okay, because 8 times 8 gives you 64. Okay, this square root symbol is called a radical sign. And the radicand is the number inside the radical sign. So, like the 4 would be considered the radicand, just for vocabulary. Okay, when we talk about square roots, you could have a positive square root, a negative square root, or both a positive or a negative square root sign. Okay, if you don't see a sign that's on the outside, you can assume that it's positive. If we have a negative sign, it's negative, or if you have this plus minus sign, I'm asking for both the positive and negative root. Okay, so if I wanted the positive root of 16, it would be 4 because 4 times 4 is 16. The negative root of 16 is negative 4. And the reason why we don't put the negative sign inside the square root sign is because you can't have two numbers that are exactly the same to multiply to negative 16. So we want the opposite and we keep it on the outside. Okay, if I want both of these, I would keep it on the outside and I would say I want the positive and negative root, and you would just transfer that into your answer. You can simply do this a lot of the times on your calculator. The only button you're not going to find is the plus minus sign. So to get your calculator and to find the square root button, you're going to hit the second button. And then right next to the 7, you're going to see the x squared button, but you have to hit the second button first so that the square root sign pops up. So if I wanted the square root of 25, hit enter. You're going to see it's 5 because 5 times 5 will give you 25. So again, you hit the second button, the x squared button, and then, for example, the square root of 49 would give you 7. If I wanted the negative root, let's say, of 64, I would hit the negative sign, so not the subtraction sign, the negative sign, which is next to the enter button. So if I wanted the negative root of 64, the negative sign has to be on the outside, and then you hit the square root button. Okay, so let's practice evaluating some of these right now. So if I wanted the positive root of 25, we actually just did that already. It's 5. If I wanted the negative root of 1, well, what number times what number gives you 1? It's 1, but I want the negative root. So what I'm going to do is just transfer that negative sign into my answer. So negative 1. When you have a question like question number 3, where you have multiple problems together, you basically do order of operations and do one part at a time. So I'm going to do the positive root of 16 first. So I know the positive root of 16 is 4 because 4 times 4 is 16. And then anytime you see a number that's on the outside, and I'm just going to rewrite this part of the problem. Anytime you have a number that's on the outside of a square root sign, it's kind of like whenever you had parentheses. It's separated through multiplication, so you can put a multiplication dot there. Okay, so this would be 4 minus 2 times the square root of 25. So we're going to take care of the square root of 25 right now, which I know is 5. And I'm going to bring down the 4, the minus, and the times 5. Now, if I do order of operations, I have to do negative 2 times 5 next, which would be negative 10. And then if I'm bringing down the 4 minus 10 would give me negative 6. Okay, when I see something weird like in question number 4, I can actually just type that all into my calculator. So I'm going to show you how you do that. So again, I would want the negative root of 9/16. So type the negative sign in first, hit the second button to type the square root in there, hit the fraction, and then 9/16. And what your calculator is doing is it's doing the square root of 9 first, then it's doing the square root of 16 next. So the square root of 9 is 3, the square root of 16 is 4, and it's separating it into the numerator and denominator. So your answer is going to be negative 3/4. Okay, for number 5, I don't have that button in my calculator, so I'm just going to transfer it into my final answer. Okay, and again, if you wanted to type that in your calculator, the square root of 4 is 2, and the square root of 25 is 5. So I know my answer is going to be the positive and negative root of 2/5. Okay, now this one doesn't work out perfectly, but I know 28 divided by 7 is 4, and I know the square root of 4 is going to be 2, but again, you can use your calculator. So I'm going to use the second button, and I'm going to do 28 over 7, and I'm going to get 2. I'm going to bring down the plus sign and the 2.4. So when I do 2 plus 2.4, I'm going to get 4.4 for my answer. Okay, for question number 7, I have plus and minus, so I want the positive and negative root of 2.25. Okay, and I can use my calculator for that one too. And your answer would be 1.5. If I didn't allow you to use a calculator, you would think of this as what's the positive and negative root almost of 225. So that would be 15, and then we would move some decimal points around. But for right now, we can use our calculator. So our answer is going to be positive and negative root of 1.5. Okay, for this one, we want the positive root of 12.25. So again, we just want a positive answer, so we don't need to worry about a sign for writing something down. You don't have to write a positive sign down. So we're going to write down in our calculator or type in 12.25. So we're going to get positive 3.5. And then for question number 9, this is a good order of operations question. You have a 5 on the outside, so we're going to save that for the end. Inside, we're going to take care of the positive root of 49. So I know 7 times 7 gives me 49, so I'm going to do that part first and rewrite the rest. I'm going to take care of the parentheses next. So 7 minus 10 is negative 3. Bring down the 5. And remember, anything that touches your parentheses is through multiplication. So 5 times negative 3 is negative 15. Okay, so we're still following our order of operations with this. Okay, the other thing that you guys are going to be doing today is cube roots. Okay, a cube root is one more step further than a square root. It's whenever a number is multiplied by itself and then multiplied by itself again. So 3 times when you talk about a cube root. A perfect cube is a number that can be written as the cube of an integer. And if you take a look, I have the list of all the perfect cubes here. So for example, if I did 1 times 1 times 1, I would get 1. Or if I did 2 times 2 times 2, I would get 8. or 3 times 3 times 3, I would get 27. These are your perfect cubes. So if you don't have that on your notes, make sure you pause your video and add that to your notes. It's nice to have these pretty handy. Perfect cubes and cube roots are opposites of one another. And if you take a look at how you distinguish them between a cube root and a square root, a cube root actually has a tiny little 3 hanging out inside, and we actually type those in our calculator a little bit differently as well. So here's how we're going to do this in our calculator. And I'm going to show you guys the steps right now with our first problem. So if you guys take a look right here, we're not going to use the same square root button. We're actually going to be using the button above it, so the one that kind of looks like the roof of a house. But before we do that, we're actually going to use the number 3 to show that we are using a cube root. So type the number 3 in, hit the second button, then the button above x squared. See how it shrinks that down? And then we're going to type in the first problem. So I'm looking for the cube root, or 3 numbers that whenever I multiply them up together, that will give me 512. So that answer is going to be 8. So 8 times 8 times 8 is going to give me 512. All right, so let's practice that one more time. Let's do that with our next problem. I'm looking for the cube root of negative 729. So this time you are allowed to have the negative sign inside the root symbol, because you can do a negative of a cube root, because when you multiply 3 negatives, you can get a negative answer. So again, you're going to type the 3, second, the one above the x squared, and you're going to type in negative 729, hit enter. So that means negative 9 times negative 9 times negative 9 would give you negative 729. Okay, I know I'm going a little bit out of order on our notes page. I'm going to go down right now to question number 2. We're going to try negative 125. So I want the cube root of negative 125. To type the 3. Whoops. See how if you do that, it's not correct? So type the 3, hit the second button, one above the x squared, so it shrinks it down, negative 125, hit enter, you get negative 5. So that means negative 5 times negative 5 times negative 5 gets you negative 125. All right, do the next one. I want the cube root of 1,000, which would be 10. Because 10 times 10 times 10 gives me 1,000. All right, this also works out too with fractions, and you can type these in as well. It's like you're taking the cube root of the numerator and the cube root of the denominator, just so you know how this works out mathematically. So I'm taking the 3 again, hit the second button, the one above the x squared, type the fraction button in, push 1 over 64. So the answer is going to be 1 over 4. So 1/4 times 1/4 times 1/4 would get you your answer for question number 5, because that'll get you 1 over 64. Let's do question 6 together, and then I'm going to have you guys try out 7 and 8 to see if you can do this correctly on your calculator. So again, 3, hit the second button, above the x squared, type in the negative button, the fraction button, 216, push the down button, and then 343, and you're going to get negative 6/7. So that means negative 6/7 times negative 6/7 times negative 6/7 gives us our answer. Okay, so again, I'm going to pause the video right now and see if you guys can do question 7 and question 8. All right, so to see if you guys came up with the right answers, the correct answers for the cube root of negative 8 over 27 is negative 2/3, and the cube root of 1 over 729 is 1/9. So again, to kind of wrap up today's lesson, a cube, or a perfect cube, is a number that is multiplied by itself 3 times. The cube root is the opposite, so it's asking you what number did you start with, okay? Squares and square roots are opposites of one another. Okay, so a perfect square is a number multiplied by itself to figure out what numbers that you end up with. So like 2 times 2 gives you 4. That's a perfect square. But a square root, like what's the square root of 4, is asking what number you started with to begin with. So again, make sure you're typing in Edpuzzle something that you learned new out of today's lesson. It could be something like positive and negative square roots. It could be something about square roots or cube roots. Maybe you learned something new on your calculator, and then we'll be practicing these problems today.